In this film, I will explain who the Disability Inclusive WASH checklist is for and when to use it. I will also show you the checklist and explain the different sections. In the third film, I'll show you how to use and complete this checklist. The checklist is for government officials and service providers working on WASH-related issues who want to make efforts more disability inclusive. This can be done by improving disability inclusion in national policies, strategies and guidance documents, as well as in operational plans and strategies. And this checklist supports that process. It sets out activities that you can include to adopt in your work to make it more disability inclusive. Now, I'll explain a bit more about that later. But the idea is that you use this checklist to review your documents and score the extent that you are including disability within your work. You can use the checklist when you're designing WASH-related policies and programs. You can use it during implementation to identify ways to strengthen disability inclusion by adding suggested activities from the checklist. You can also use it to monitor and evaluate how disability inclusive your work is. So now I'm going to open the checklist and explain the different parts. So it has 5 worksheets. The first explains how the checklist was developed, what it's for, what it is, who's it for, and how to use it. The second worksheet is the Disability Inclusive WASH checklist for service providers. There are several columns. On the left, you have concepts, then guiding principles, activity numbers, suggested activities, scoring from 1 to 4, and resource topic. And I'm going to explain each of those columns in turn. So first off, the concepts, these are on the left of the screen. They include individualized services, which is about ensuring WASH services can be used by everyone and that information is accessible to everyone. Next is entitlement and affordability. I'm just going to zoom in on those. So entitlement and affordability relates to providing financial support for people with disabilities. Capabilities-based services is about investing in people with disabilities as leaders and partnering with organisations of persons with disabilities. Participation is about empowering people with disabilities and supporting them to influence decisions that will affect them. Protection against harm relates to when people interact with WASH services. Family resource is about recognising the role that family members and caregivers play in helping people with disabilities with their WASH needs and requirements. It's also about supporting caregivers to carry out that role. Accountability is about being clear about who is accountable for providing what service. Capacity enhancement is enhancing skills and knowledge of WASH sector actors. And finally, quality. This is about developing evidence-based interventions. It includes collecting data with people with disabilities and their families, and then using that to inform, monitor, and evaluate responses. So moving on to the next column, which is guiding principles. So these are loosely worded like objectives, and they relate to the concept. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the guiding principles. So for example, the guiding principles principle for individualized service is program supports the rights of people with disabilities with individually tailored WASH services to meet their needs, choices, and impairments, so that they can utilise WASH services. Next to that is a column with an activity number. And then next to that column gives suggested activities. So these suggested activities in column E suggest, they demonstrate what kind of things can be done to achieve the guiding principle and the concept. So for example, under individualized services, suggested activity number 1.6 is provide hygiene products to households of persons with disabilities. So that might include the provision of soap, cleaning products, incontinence products, menstrual health materials, commodes, bedpans, etc. So if you were to deliver this activity, then you are working towards the guiding principle that people with disabilities have tailored WASH services to meet their needs and their choices. And that means you're working towards the concept individualized service. Now, it's important to note that these are just suggested activities. You might think of other things that you want to do that will help you achieve the guiding principle and the concept, and that's great. These just give you some ideas. So now we're going to move across to the scoring. I'm just going to zoom out a little. So here we move on to how you use the checklist to review a policy or program document. Now I explain exactly how you do that. I take you through a document and complete the checklist with you in film 3. But in brief, you would read your document and highlight any text that references a concept. And then you would award each reference a quality of commitment score. Now, there are 4 possible scores across the top. 1 is when the concept is only mentioned. 2 is where the concept is mentioned and explained. 3 is where specific actions are identified to address the concept. And 4 is where you have intention to monitor the concept, or you're actually monitoring it and you're reporting against that. If the reference to the concept is awarded a score 3 or 4, these are high quality scores because the information provided in the document includes specific actions and intention to monitor progress. So concepts that are awarded a high quality score are likely to result in disability inclusion. Now, any references that are scored 1 to 2 are low quality, and that's because they do not include specific activities or monitor mechanisms. And that means it's unlikely that efforts will result in disability inclusion. So you want to work towards achieving high quality scores. Now, the final column is resource topic here. Now, this relates to the resources worksheet, which is the 4th one, and that's here. So here, there's a list of practical resources that you can draw on to help you make your work more disability inclusive. There's a list of topics on the left. These include accessible WASH, caregivers, tips on including wheelchairs, disaggregating data, and so on. Then you'll see that the publication details and the title are set next to the topic. The synopsis column explains what the publication includes, and then you can see a link to the publication on the right. So now going back to the service provider's checklist, where you have the resource topic, If you want guidance on how to strengthen individualised services, for example, you would look at the resource topic, accessible wash or incontinence, for example. So then you go to accessible wash and you have all these resources that will help you make your or work towards achieving individualised services. Similarly, for incontinence, down here, there's quite a few resources related to that. Now, this resource list is not exhaustive, so there are always going to be more guidance that can be added, and we can do that. So going back to these worksheets, the next worksheet is the government officials checklist. Now, this is set out in exactly the same way as the service providers checklist, but the suggested activities are only related to policies and policy guidance documents. But it is exactly the same as the service providers one, just the wording of suggested activities and the focus of those relate to policies. Now, the final worksheet is an example. It's an example of a completed checklist. So you can see the scores have been added against the concepts. So those are these columns. Now I'm going to zoom in a little. So you see the scoring. Now there's a mix of low and high quality scores. Now the completed example of the document shows that high quality scoring or the individualized services concept scores highly, as does quality down the bottom. So activities related to these concepts are likely to result in disability inclusion. Now the document scores low quality across entitlement and affordability, capability-based services, participation, protection against harm, family resource. It doesn't receive any mention to accountability. That isn't mentioned at all in the document. It also scores low quality on capacity enhancement. So attention to these concepts in programme documents is unlikely to result in disability inclusion. So that's when you start thinking, how can I move these low quality scores across to high quality so that we see some real impact and change. So that is the Disability Inclusive WASH checklist for government officials and service providers. Please watch film 3, which shows you how to score a document using the checklist and how to complete the checklist.